Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Welcome to the Growth Whisperers. Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Today's guest is Kevin Lawrence, the one and the only founder of Lawrence & Co., leadership advisor to CEOs around the world, co-author of Scaling Up, and author of Your Oxygen Mask First. Kevin was also my co-host for 166 episodes of The Whisperers that frankly got us both through COVID and was a super fun, journey into what makes enduring companies tick. So do check that out if you haven't yet, The Growth Whisperers. Each week we shared insights on how to build enduring great companies. Kevin's new book, The 4 Forces of Growth, is inspired by the physics of flight. It explains why some companies keep climbing while others stall, uncovering why organizations drift from growth, how to spot early warning signs, and the courage required to stay in growth mode. We'll unpack the 4 Forces model that Kevin's built and what it truly means to be a growth-focused CEO. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brad. It's great to be back doing a podcast together. We had a lot of fun doing the Growth Whispers for all those years.
We did indeed. I couldn't help but intentionally stuff it up at the beginning.
That was awesome.
Because we had so much fun together. So for people who aren't familiar with you or the Growth Whisperers, they can almost vividly remember the first time we met. And this was at a Gazelles conference, which later became Scaling Up. But a Gazelles conference, it must have been 2012 or 2013. And I was curiously walking around meeting all of the different people.
You were like the pesky new kid in class, going through and asking 47 questions. And I remember I loved it because that's exactly what I did when I joined. I went to all of who are the most experienced people, and I had lists of questions.
And that's exactly what I was doing.
It was.
That's what you said at the time. You're like, oh, you're the only person that's doing exactly what I did. We kind of became fast friends from then, which was super fun, and enjoyed journeys all through America on our journey. Again, which led to the Growth Whisperers at the start. So, I think the other thing is that you have built and grown a practice. So you started as a singular coach, and then over time you built a practice. How many coaches have you got across North America now?
I think the team is in total 18, of which 12 are, there's the support team that's behind the scenes, which are part of it, but then 12 people doing the actual growth strategy and execution work with our client.
Yeah. So you call them advisors, I think, is that right?
Yep.
Growth advisors. Yeah.
Growth advisors. Yep.
The challenge that we all face, when you're working with a $300 million company and helping them to build a strategy, you kind of feel a bit different to the coach who's doing something else. It's just one of the challenges of the industry, but that's fine. So since the Growth Whisperers, before we jump into your new book, what's been happening in your world for those who are sort of familiar from before when we were doing the podcast together?
Yeah, I mean, the firm continues to grow. I mean, we continue to add, I mean, because we're obsessed with doing, like you are, doing great growth strategy work with our clients and making sure it actually converts to growth, not just, hypothesis of growth, actual growth. Our clients are really happy and then they keep referring more people. So I've now got a COO Curtis, who's helping to run the firm. And the team is becoming more of a business because like you mentioned, I initially didn't plan to build a consulting firm. That wasn't my goal. I wanted to do the work and help a whole bunch of CEOs to scale their business. But then with the overflow of opportunities, I couldn't help anymore. I was maxed and it just grew and grew and grew. And actually, we're just celebrating right now the 10-year anniversary of the first advisor who joined the team. He actually joined himself to the team almost. Like I wasn't looking to bring him on. He hitched his wagon to me. I'm like, okay. And name's Dean Ritchie, and he's been great. So yeah, we're 10 years into that, 30 years as a firm since I started. Yeah, just continuing just to try and help more and more and master our craft while our clients continue to grow.
30 years in the industry is quite an achievement. How did you get into it in the beginning?
Well, we could call it fluke or you could call it fate. I was working in the advertising business, and I remember I went to this workshop and I wasn't loving what I was doing. It was good, but I wasn't loving it. And I got this thing that I really wanted to help leaders and people squeeze the juice out of life. And for whatever reason, I was always focused on entrepreneurs because I think I have an entrepreneurial spirit. And so I thought I really want to help entrepreneurs to thrive. And so when I left my job, I started doing marketing consulting. And then I realized it was worthless. We'd come up with these ideas to improve how they took care of their customers and grew their businesses organically, which was my passion, because I saw that people didn't take care of their customers very well, which was good when you're in the advertising business because they have to keep spending money.
Yeah.
But I thought there was a smarter approach. And so we would come up with these ideas, and I found out that ideas are almost useless unless people do something. And then I heard of this thing called coaching. I'm like, what's this? And then I met somebody who turned out to become a very, very good friend of mine. Her name's Teresa LaRocque. I haven't seen her for a while. I got to connect with her. But she was doing this coaching thing. And I'm like, tell me more. She did a sample session and it didn't seem for me, but it got my interest. And I started learning about coaching because the idea was you take this idea and then you go and help them to execute it and make the idea work and convert it into results or value. So I went, oh, that's a good idea. And then there was this guy, Thomas Leonard, who was the founder of modern coaching back then in the 90s. And I started taking every class. He did all of his training virtually, like by teleclass back in the day. Started doing all of his training. The guy was a wizard, like brilliant, like masterful. I fell into it because I had a desire to help people. This was a more effective tool set to help the entrepreneurs I wanted to help.
Very nice. How did you get involved in Gazelles in the very early days?
So weird. Life is fate. So I just for what it's worth, we're preparing for our team retreat next week, and my team hasn't seen this yet, but we created a map of all of our current clients and where they came from. And it's one relationship led to another, one led to another, 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 which is kind of like the story of my life and everyone's life. So we've got this map and we trace it back. And a long story short, when I was back in the media business, I had a mentor, Joff Grona, I just caught up with him a while ago. He's still doing advisory work in his late 80s. He still runs a group for retired CEOs.
Oh,
He's an amazing man. Yeah, and he introduced me to somebody else, another guy who I'll do the short version of the story. But this guy turned out at one point to be the president of YPO. But at that time, he wasn't. But he connected me with EO to speak at their conference. So I spoke at the EO. There was a global summit in Vancouver. And this would be the early 2000s. And I finished my session and I was chatting with someone. And somebody goes, oh, hey, Vern's here. We can catch the end of a session. I'm like, who's Vern? I'd never heard of the guy. And so we went and caught the last 15 minutes of a session. And he was a good, charming guy. But I noticed he had more people in his room than I had in mine. And there's got to be something here. And he was talking about his tools and I don't know, and a 2-day workshop. So I ended up going to his 2-day workshop with a client of mine and go, let's check this out. And I sat skeptically in the back and I'm like, he's talking about like daily meetings and things. Okay. So I went and started testing this out with my client. The stuff worked. So I reached back out and said, hey, I want to be one of your advisors, one of your coaches. And he put me in touch with a guy named Ron Huntington, who we both know is a wonderful
An absolute
man,
legend. Yeah.
absolute legend. And, Ron said, no, we don't need anybody right now in the Vancouver market. Thank you. And I just decided that's what I wanted. So I just kept following up with him and 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 following up with him. And eventually he goes, okay. and then he made the mistake of letting me in. And that's how I kind of, got started. But it's generally in the space, I'm quite skeptical of a lot of these. There's a lot of tools and theories, and a lot of them are entertaining. But I saw there was something real there, especially when we tested it in our clients. And I said, I gotta do this. And it turned out to be, a great experience for me.
And in writing the book Scaling Up, as I understand it, you flew around the world and interviewed 50 CEOs that became a part of the content. Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't fly. We did them virtually, but yes, I
Okay.
interviewed. We decided, let's take a look and let's interview all the existing users of Rockefeller Habits, or some of the really ones that really grabbed onto it. And let's learn from them. What's working, what's not, how could we make things better? And then grabbing some examples of how they'd benefited and their ideas for growth otherwise. So yeah, I interviewed all 50 of the main case studies in the book, and it was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
Like, just, at one point, it's like you get so many great stories and insights from these people that are doing it and then proving it out and getting the results. And I still talk to lots of them to this day, like almost like probably 15 years later, something like that.
That's awesome.
It was an amazing experience. I wish they were in person. That would have been even more fun.
Yeah. One last question before we jump into the book. In the firm today, what are you proud of?
I am proud of our EGR, earned growth rate. So if you go into the Net Promoter System created by brilliant people at Bain, which is measuring customer satisfaction or engagement, there's this great article that talks about, if your Net Promoter Score is high, then your earned growth rate should also be high. And earned growth rate is your customers growing your business for you, earned through quality of work and reputation, not bought growth, which is through sales and marketing. We have a very, very good NPS and a spectacular earned growth rate, because the team of people around is like, our firm is not an easy place for people. It's not an easy place to hang out. And actually, you don't hang out. It's a high strung group of people always trying to be better. And our earned growth rate is spectacular. Like, the phone just continues to ring, or the email continues to ting or ding, where our clients continue to build our business for us. And because my team is so committed, and I learned so much from them. But the fact that the business is building itself, we just have to continue to honor the work and continue to be really good students of the game. But this team of people, Brad, like, when I started, I never had any idea. And I've shared this with you before. And I'm in sessions. We have monthly learning sessions. I'm learning as much from them as they're learning from me. And I've been doing it 30 years.
Yeah.
But everyone's bringing their ideas. So it's just, it's an all committed team. And today is Monday when we're recording this. I'm going to catch up. Curtis, the CEO, is flying in Wednesday. We're going to prep. Thursday, we start our retreat, and we got it over the weekend. And I'm excited to spend time with these people. Like, it's pretty cool, especially as something I never planned on doing.
Very nice. Now, the new book, The 4 Forces of Growth. I know you've been talking about this for a long time, in a good way.
Long.
Well, yeah, like, it's been a model that has not been a flash in the pan. You've been working on it for a long time. We even did an episode connected, if not about it, on the Growth Whisperers years ago, and now it's come to life. So first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I say that because it's a lot of work. Second, what first led you to connect the physics of flight with business growth? What was the kind of, how did you connect all of those dots to get this idea together?
Well, we'll have to go back to 2019, before COVID, when I started. And I hired this advisor, Amy, to help me to be more effective on my next book. And Scaling Up was great. Oxygen Masks First was different. It was more on a personal side, but I want to go back on the strategy side, and I want to do something very, very relevant. So I got some guidance, and she basically said, you've got to look for a very, very simple, organic metaphor, essentially, in terms of doing this. And because I love metaphors. And she had given me the advice that, The Auction Mass First was a great book, but there's a lot of different things. She tried to get me to focus on one. And when we had a couple day working session, we're in Denver, and she was like, just think about this. I want you to think about what could this be? And I was wrestling with this challenge where I see a lot of people who would grow companies, and then the growth would flatten out, like the pilot pulling back on the engine, right? On the thrust engine, which I didn't have that metaphor then. And I just started thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, like I was obsessed with how can I find a way to help people to be more successful at enduring growth when they kind of get in their own way, basically, when they get in their own way internally. And I don't know. I probably, if I go back and look at my iPad, because I was brainstorming all kinds of ideas, and then I somehow, and I don't remember exactly, I came across this 4 forces. Because what I was doing is I was looking at forces of nature. Like I was looking at biology.
Yeah.
And everything, animals and plants, and I was looking at weather. I was looking at all of these things to try and find a way into this thing about building sustainable, incredible growth. Yeah, I ended up on the 4 forces of flight in some magical way, and that's kind of what anchored it. And then okay, does this relate? How does this relate? And I did iteration. I got to go back and look at my iPad. Iteration after iteration of the model.
I remember you talking to me about it and you explaining how this is what I'm thinking and this creates lift and so forth. So I have been a part and loved to be a part of that journey over the time. So opportunities and courage combine. Opportunities and courage to create growth. That's what you're saying. So why do so many CEOs under-allocate energy to growth and over-invest in improvement?
Yeah. Well, because as a business gets big, it's more complex and there's more problems, and problems scream at you. Problems scream and beg for attention.
Yeah.
Our human psyche and how we're wired naturally feels good when we solve problems. So psychologically, we get intrinsic reward, we get external rewards, we improve efficiency, quality, we hit our gross margin number, we hit our SG&A percentage of revenue, we hit our profit target. There's all these intrinsic and extrinsic reward systems built into fixing and dialing things in. Never mind the fact that problems scream at you. And the bigger the business gets, the more screaming there is. And your ego feels great by solving the screaming. Growth doesn't scream at you.
Yeah.
Growth doesn't scream at you. It doesn't beg for your attention. And so as companies grow, instead of focusing on growth, it's almost like the pilot ends up in the cabin dealing with all the challenges in the cabin and loses track of navigating the plane, and things go off course. The CEO ends up in the back of the plane all the time, and they should be in the cockpit. So they're good people, they're smart people, and they did it all right at the beginning to grow. But as it gets bigger and more complex, they end up in the back. And somehow they get rewarded for it. And sometimes, unfortunately, they think that they're actually doing a great job. When they're supposed to be in the damn pilot seat, but there's so much screaming and chaos and intrinsic reward, they stay in the back. And then they wonder why the plane goes off track. And this happens to good people inadvertently. Yeah.
If there's a favorite bit, my favorite bit is profit per X, because it's kind of central it's central thematic to the book and the essence of what you're saying to focus on. And again, we've done episodes on profit per X.
Yep.
It's central to the work that we do, both of us. So profit per X from Jim Collins is the economic denominator that drives a company's financial engine. So in this book, you're saying that real growth is created by selling more X's from this profit per X concept, and at least sustaining, if not trying to grow, the profit from each X. If that's the definition of real growth, how does that idea connect to the 4 forces of growth model, that you've developed?
Right.
And how does having clarity on your X help CEOs stay courageous and opportunity focused?
Well, that's a lot of different things. Let me pick one. Let's start with the first one. So you can look at growth through the 2 different lenses. Unit growth, or growing your X's, right? Number of customers served, number of transactions in a retail store, number of room nights sold in a hotel, number of subscribers to software, whatever it is. Growing that X is thinking about growth like an entrepreneur. thinking about the profit you make on each of those X's, which you can grow your bottom line, is thinking about growth like an accountant. And you need accountants and you need entrepreneurs. But the problem is the entrepreneurs end up being accountants if they're not careful, and they get rewarded for it. It's not bad. It's just like that's the thing. So in our world, our companies normally want to continue to grow. And generally, as a rule of thumb, between every 3 to 7 years, double the business, right? Depending on their growth rate. I like 3 to 5, but generally say it's 3 to 7. We have to grow the X's. You can't only do accountant growth. You have to do entrepreneur growth. You got to serve more customers and expand and do more. So the challenge is that there's so many darn problems pulling your focus down into, we'll call it the accountant growth area, that it keeps it away from the entrepreneurial growth. And by the way, it's safer. There is more perceived risk in the entrepreneurial growth because you got to test new things, new markets, new locations. I was just saw on LinkedIn while we're waiting for this call to start, and one of our clients just opened up their second location in the US. And we talked about that for 4 or 5 years before they made the step into the US from Canada, because that's a high risk move.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage to do that. So going back into it, the X growth comes from when you're focused on opportunities to do more and create more value for more new clients or more new products or more new services or whatever your version of expansion is. But that's generally the entrepreneur who's going to drive the entrepreneurial type mindset that's going to drive it. And generally over time, most of the resources get pulled out of that inadvertently.
Yeah.
And everyone focuses on accountant growth, and they get beautiful financials and a very well-run business. But the growth, there's no fuel going to the growth engine.
And so that's how the clarity. So that was the second part of the question. How does having clarity on your X help CEOs stay courageous and opportunity focused?
Well, one of the things you see, like for example, when clients contact us and want us to work with them and to help them to reset their strategy and be their partner in growth strategy, the one thing I go and I look at, in most of the cases, they could be impeccably and beautifully using a tool set like scaling up, or it could be EOS or whatever it happens to be. They're all like, good for goal setting and alignment. And I've seen people using these tools almost perfectly, but they got the wrong goals. There's nothing that drives the X. Yeah. It's all about profit per X, or it doesn't even drive anything. So again and again, when we even look at people's strategic plans, well, they got a strategy for mediocrity inadvertently, because they're over-indexed and responding to the problems and the noise. And they get over-indexed on accountant growth, which is safer and perceived to be easier, but they don't know. Like, they don't know. And once you see the 4 forces model, and you got to have something allocated to grow on your X's, otherwise the growth won't sustain. You can focus on the profit per X, or I'll call it the accountant or operational growth. You can focus on that for a while, and your growth engine might still go, but sooner or later it's going to bonk. It's never enough.
So maybe give us the verbal definition, explanation of the 4 forces of growth, because we've kind of gotten into it, and I just recognize that people might not appreciate the visual.
Sure. So the 4 forces of growth, you can look it up. It's pretty straightforward. But basically, the lift of the wings and the thrust of the engine puts the plane up in the air and keeps it there. So the lift of the wings is like us looking up at opportunities. What's possible, the next customer to serve, next market, next service, whatever it happens to be. But what's fought by is problems that pulls your energy down. Opportunities takes you up to possibility. Problems pull you down and get you focusing on internal issues.
So before you get to the thrust, so if you're focusing most of your time on the problems that are dragging you down, and you're great at solving those problems, you're not looking at the opportunities.
Yeah, because you can't see them because you're so mired in problems, and problems never go away.
Yep.
And unfortunately, some of them are worth 75 cents. Some are worth $7.5 million, and humans sometimes have a hard time discerning the difference because they all scream loudly and they're all perceived to be bad. Yeah. There's a whole other thing about ignoring a bunch of problems, but that's another piece. So gravity will gradually pull you down to focus on problems, just like gravity will gradually pull the plane down to the ground. The other axis is courage. Courage is like the thrust of the engine pushing you forward into unknown places. The opposite is fear. And as organizations scale, they go from being very courageous, as all startups are, early stage companies are. But if the CEO doesn't continue to push courage and create courage, it'll slow down and be so conservative, and everyone will be playing to not lose. They won't take chances because it's safer, right? And it's like there's a saying is like, no one ever got back in the day, no one ever got fired for choosing IBM.
Yeah.
Because it's safe, conservative. So by nature, if the CEO isn't in the cockpit flying the plane actively, naturally it's going to slow down because of fear and lower down or fall down because of problems, and everything gets distracted. So growth happens when you've got the opportunities and the courage. Improvement happens when you have courage and you focus on problems. And again, that's good. That's that accountant or operational growth. You need to do that. But the problem is, by default, people end up almost only doing that. And that's why their growth slows down dramatically.
Okay, so to grow your X's and to grow the profit from each X, which is the definition of growth that we discussed earlier, focusing on courage and opportunity. That's where that lies, and having the right people to manage the other aspects throughout the business. So with that, thank you for that definition, that explanation, that understanding of what those four forces are. One of the things that you talk about is preparation fuels courage. So being prepared matters. How does CEOs build the readiness and confidence to stay courageous in this courage and opportunity mindset when markets become turbulent? Because there's only one thing I can guarantee. In the future, things will happen and markets will become turbulent at some point.
Well, again, this is a bit of a very challenging situation, because when the CEO and exec team, because it's not just the CEO, when they get more mired in the problems and maybe caught up in some of the fear and all that stuff, they get more internally focused. It can unfortunately become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they get more mired in that, and that becomes their mindset. And then they get stuck inside the business. The place where great CEOs take their businesses and manage well through turbulent times is in the cockpit or out front.
Yeah.
Facing the market, talking to customers, talking to partners. It does not happen so if as a CEO, if the CEO is spending 65, 70% of their time interacting with their own team, it's going to be really hard to navigate challenging times. They should be spending more than half of their time in the market, connecting and working on the future and seeing what's going on, directly getting information and insights. But most get so trapped inside their own businesses that they're not even in the position or having the conversations to be able to navigate through the most challenging things. They become super internally focused, where growth is externally focused.
And I've heard you say before, CEOs should have a great deal of their time spent thinking in the 3-year period rather than the next month or next week period.
Beyond this financial year, beyond the budgeted financial year, obviously, because the challenge is if you don't have a super strong team, like an incredibly strong team, then the CEO ends up with some part-time jobs, backfilling for weak executives or weak directors. Right? Or the weak direct reports, let's just say, or the director. So if they don't have a super strong team, it's very difficult to do what I'm talking about, because they're needed inside the business. And that makes it really, really challenging. So, but the ideal is in every business, there's a different mix of how much time the CEO should spend and where, and different stages of the business and where they're at. But generally, if you don't have an incredibly strong team, you have a bunch of part-time jobs. So you're only, half-time CEO to start with, because you're backfilling so much, and it makes it very difficult.
So you discuss the different, I think, quadrants, the different areas where people in the leadership team should sit. So COO, Chief Operating Officer, in improvement, CFO in analysis, and legal in agony, I think. How do you counter that with ensuring that you have a balanced leadership team that stays collectively in growth? How do you kind of bring those together or reconcile that?
Yeah, that's great. Well, that goes back to the work that we do, and making sure you have the right strategic plan, the right plan.
Yes.
You set the focus of that team by the goals we set as an organization. And I'll give an example. There's a great business that I was talking to last year. They built a wonderful business. They got to a couple $100 million in revenue, incredible profits. But I was connected with the CEO because they kept investing more and more of their overhead, their G&A, and their expenses were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's no growth. And I went and I just looked at the financials. The financials were really quite healthy, except for there was no growth and the overhead was growing too much. But I looked at the strategic plan and it was beautiful, like thesis beautiful, which we know in our world, that's a flag. If it's too beautiful of a 60-page document, people have normally spent too much time on it. But anyways, it was beautiful. It was a work of art. But I went through and looked at it, and there was almost nothing to do with driving growth, like the X's part of growth.
Yeah.
It's all operational enhancements and product. It's all enhancements or improvements, as we talk about in the model, and not growth. So it's like, and as I said to the CEO, I said, you have an opportunity to fix this. It's your job to take reins of the strategy process and make sure that they start with high level thinking about what's going to grow the business and improve it. He says, yeah, but my executives are just running with this. I said, yes, it's really apparent that they are.
Yeah.
You got a bunch of operators and accountants building your strategy. It's very, very evident. You don't have enough entrepreneur in it. You don't have enough CEO in it. That's why it's all improvement. And that's why your business will not grow. It can't.
Yeah.
Because all the directive is improve, not grow. And that's where well-intentioned people don't understand this. And he and his team think they're doing really good work, and they're doing part of the work they're doing is excellent.
Yeah.
But it's not, it doesn't match their aspirations, and because they want to continue to grow the business.
One of the really interesting things that I found was you made the comment that every 3 to 4 years, most companies hit a growth wall. What do you think's really happening in that pattern, and what can leaders do to minimize the effect of that?
Obviously, as you know, the answer, it depends. But when we see lots of different things, generally there's two things that I see. One, as people get going on growth and say they go and double their business in the next few years, the team can start to get comfortable because growth is hard. It takes a lot of exertion to really make it happen. So the team, in the ones where it slows down or they hit a wall, they get comfortable or they get tired. And then they stop pushing as hard and everything starts to soften. It's almost whether it's because they feel like they have arrived or they just need a breather. That's one thing. Second is that they end up with a few key people that are in key roles and can't do it. So the organization kind of gets congested or stuck because there's a few critical decisions on key people to make. And whether it's demoting someone, changing a role and giving them a different portfolio, splitting a role, or even letting them go, most of the most successful companies we work with are incredibly loyal to their people.
Yes.
And yeah. And I have the chapter of, there's a whole section of a book called Enemies and Enablers. So once you understand the model of what you need to do to continue to grow, then there's enemies and enablers. One of them is the strategy we've talked about. One's around numbers. One's around how the CEO spends their personal time, how much of their time's on growth, but the other's around the team. For most organizations, the loyalty becomes a liability. And they end up with too many people who are okay, but not spectacular in their roles. And then that becomes like a broken leg of the stool. And the business gets stuck and it gets hard. Like we've had, people that have been with companies for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years that they get to the point that they really can't play the role anymore. And if they were on a professional sports team, it would be socially acceptable to make a change.
Yeah.
But in business, it's very uncomfortable and people don't like it. Like I was on a call with a CEO recently and really key member of their team, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but really key member who they really like, but it's time for the person to go somewhere else. And we were just debating, how do we do it? And this, hard driving CEO is just like, I don't want to have to deal with this.
Yeah.
And how do I deal with it in the most respectful way? And we found we have a way. But that's like those tough decisions. Generally, if you have too many of those you're not dealing with, it dies because the system can't handle it.
It's funny you say that because it's certainly my experience as well. And the general media or popular culture would say that the entrepreneur is hard and brutal. And it's the thing that's portrayed is most often in my experience, the opposite, where we're saying the loyalty is actually working against you here and it's costing you significantly.
Yeah, I would say all of the best CEOs that I work with, all are loyal to a fault. And we're talking family businesses who have built enterprises doing hundreds of millions and up into the, single billions. We don't usually go past a couple billion, but yeah, like substantial businesses.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, if there's one thing I consistently have to make a note and follow up with the CEOs I work with, is the tough conversations about people. Most of the entrepreneurs were like, they're purpose led, trying to do good things, but they're building serious enterprises. It's a challenge. So in the chapter of the book called "The Problem of Pond Hockey," I'll spare the metaphor, but it's really about them shifting from thinking about the performance of the team and being loyal to their friends almost, to being loyal to the performance like a professional sport team would be. And they don't have to go all the way to a NBA or a NFL or NHL. Like those are the hockey league in Canada, North America, or the football league or whatever it happens to be. They don't have to go all the way there, but they got to get closer.
Yeah.
And where it needs to be about performance. Otherwise, the business won't be able, it just won't be able to work. You can't, on an airplane, you can't have a mechanic who tightens up most of the bolt.
No.
Right? Because it's a problem. And unfortunately, we kind of keep the people around. You got like 8 out of the 12 bolts. It's always fine. It'll be okay. In aviation, it doesn't work that way, and in scaling companies, it doesn't either. But we try to get away with our good friend who's good at 8 bolts, and it hurts. Then people end up part-time jobs, and it creates all kinds of problems. So that is the hardest part of the work we do, as you know, getting people to. And I believe it's like we got to make sure they have the conversation first and say, hey, Kevin, you're not meeting the mark. I need you to be better in this way. And how can I help you? Like, you got to have the conversation. It's not just letting people go. It's trying to help them to win, or finding the way they could win or the role they could win. But that absolutely gets in the way.
How do you know when fear is taking over decision making? You talk about courage and fear being constantly in tension.
Great question.
How do you manage that?
It's a great question. I mean, a lot of this is intuitive because I see it and I hear it. When you talk, so it would be equivalent to this. I have a real serious fear of heights, like serious fear of heights. And it's like, fear is getting me. Remember once we went to cross the suspension bridge in Vancouver, and like I stood at the edge, my kids crossed, I couldn't do it. And it's like, it's obvious. Like it was pretty obvious I was terrified. And like, if I had to do it to save the life of one of my kids, maybe I could have. I hope I could. Yeah. But it was an optional thing, and I just couldn't get myself to do it. So we have a conversation. It's really clear what has to happen. They've agreed that it should happen, and then they wobble, and then they don't execute. Like they don't take a step that's obvious. Yep. And I give the afraid of heights pick because it's pretty obvious. Like it's quite obvious. If you look at these organizations where they're stuck in paralysis analysis, or they're not, it's just people talk, they don't do. And it becomes more, it's obvious.
So does that mean that their opportunities are being identified but not turned into priorities or actions and then being executed?
It could be opportunities or problems. Like if you go across the horizontal axis, courage versus fear, that relates to opportunities and problems. So it's like failure to execute. So it could be about dealing with a problem, or it could be about capitalizing on it could be either. People are sitting waiting for things to happen versus making decisive steps. It could be in either quadrant.
Okay. So drawing on that, you said that it's 4 times harder to grow in a challenging market. So what do you think, or what have you observed is the difference between CEOs who manage to stay in that growth mode when everyone else is pulling back in a challenging market?
Similar to what I said before, they are out front. And so I've got a number of clients in the same industry I'm not going to name, but this industry is struggling right now in North America. And one of them is kicking butt and taking names. And a couple other ones are okay, and some are hurting bad. Same industry, same market dynamics. But the one that is kicking butt and taking names, this guy is a spectacular CEO. I think going back 18 months, he's probably been working 16 hours a day, at least 6 days a week. Like, and if you take the weekend, maybe 8 hours each day anyway, just incredibly hard and attacking opportunities, attacking. And they'll be on it and they'll be on it and they'll be talking to the customers and they'll come back to the team. Okay, well, if we change this and this and this, we can make this deal happen. And boom, he's out the next day and they're talking to people, pushing, challenging, closing things, innovating, notably changing product sets to make it work for now. He drives his team absolutely bonkers. And they love him, and then he drives them nuts at the same time. But he's connected to the customers every single day. He's connected to the market, not just working hard. He is out there like, okay, we thought we were going to do X or Y. Okay, but the market's saying E and F. How could we do that? How could we do that? And then he'll talk to this person, this person, this person. So he is front lines, seeing what's going on and doing everything in his power to make it happen. Where other people are like, geez, it's kind of tough out there. And it's hunger, it's hustle, and it's connection to customer. And if I would, one major message that we see in all this for the CEOs that continue to grow are tuned into customer needs. What do they need? What do they need? What do they need? And then rallying the team to go and drive in that direction. And that's not the only answer. But when you're plugged into solving customer problems or leveraging opportunities, like good things happen. But that doesn't happen in your office. And way too many leaders play office way too much, in my mind. Which, I can be, go ahead.
And so drawing on that and thinking about your previous book, Your Oxygen Mask First, which was an outstanding book for those of the listeners who aren't familiar with it, because it spoke for potentially the first time seriously about mental health in entrepreneurs. And it's a hard thing to do, and it's a real challenge. And so coming back to opportunity and courage, the growth and pushing those X's and the profit per X and those. So how do we reconcile the two? Because there's always a little bit too much. How do you find the sweet spot? I think the phrase that you said in Oxygen Mask was leaders can't help their companies if they can't breathe themselves. How does that intersect with courage?
That's a great thing, because that CEO I was talking to you about, who is kicking butt and taking names in a very challenging market for their industry, I'd call him a couple times a week, every week. Hey, how's it going? What's going on? Hey, how's it going? Because I was watching out for his mental health. I wasn't calling as much to see how he's going. I was calling to make sure his brain wasn't imploding, because he was pushing himself so hard and running very, very hot.
Yeah.
I was playing defense, if you could call it, on his offense to make sure that he was okay, because he was putting himself in very, very high risk of mentally melting down. Yeah. And I remember a lot of times when I call him, and things have settled down now, but he might just unload for like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Like just talk and vent out all the crazy stuff that's happening. But I was proactive because I know he was at high risk. And there was a couple times when I thought he was about to boil over, and we took a couple of different steps. But it's a hard thing, because there's a reason why companies are worth so much. To get companies to these next levels is hard, and it takes very intense efforts normally to get there. And the reality is, all of us get burnt out along the way. We just don't want to get burnt out so bad that our life is in danger or our health is in danger. So there's a fine line between pushing really, really hard on those opportunities and growing your company, and to the point where it gets you.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It's an active thing, and it's almost like driving. In Canada in the winter, here we get snow. So driving on snow, like slippery roads, is like you got to pay attention. And I guess if we go back, the Australia equivalent would be in a massive rainstorm. If the road is covered in water and you could hydroplane, you got to be paying attention, and you got to be really having a good sense of what's going on when you're really pushing hard, because it's dangerous, and you can slide off and spin and end up on the side of the road.
So really the books complement each other quite well, is what I'm hearing. And pay attention to both, especially if you're in the leadership team or supporting someone who's in the leadership team in whatever capacity. It's hard work.
Yeah, so you've always got to pay attention to the growth of the org and obviously yourself, but you got to make sure that you don't push it too hard and break it, both the org and yourself.
So you're aware that my latest book is about building a better business. How would you define a better business?
To me, it's all in mastering the improvement, like making sure that it runs like a Swiss watch. And there's a lot of people that don't want to build a bigger business, and that's great. But for those people, they can put more energy. They still need some energy into growth, otherwise the business will shrink. But it's dialing in your operational effectiveness, dialing in your customer value prop and your whatever you deliver to your customer, dialing in your efficiencies. Like creating a world-class business is a great thing to do. And you could either keep it at that size or you could grow it. So it's all dialing in the operational things, which every business needs to do. It's just a matter of whether you put 90% of your energy into driving and improving how it all operates, and I call the improvement quadrant, and 10 on growth, or do you put 40% of your resources on growth, 40% on improvement, and a couple in the other quadrants?
Yeah.
And so that's, I mean, for some people that I love to grow. That's I love to grow companies. It's just for whatever reason, that's a game I like to play. But there's lots of people that don't want to grow and they just want to dial it in and make it spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice. What's a book that you would recommend for the audience that isn't your book or my book?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, I'm biased by all the Jim Collins stuff. He has the best research for the game that we play. So I would recommend every single book Jim Collins has ever written because they are the source code on building enduring great companies. But that's sort of common. If it wasn't that, I would go Better, Simpler Strategy. It is a wonderful book about creating value and the principles of creating value for the customer. And ideally, the idea is true value, because value creation is something a lot of people don't understand. That means making your organization way more valuable. And we had a meeting recently, one of our clients that we're going to sell, and we have the investment bankers came and made a presentation to us to evaluate our business. And as we build it over the next coming years, what we got to do to maximize the value.
Yep.
But value, a big part of value creations and strategy, which is in this book, I love, and it's increasing the customer's willingness to pay, but you never increase your price all the way. You got to leave value in there. You got to leave some place for them to feel good. And your suppliers or your vendors decreasing the level to which they will sell to you.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you increase the customer's willingness to pay and decrease the market's willingness to sell, I mean, that they'll sell to you at a lower price,
It's gross
you
margin.
create this wonderful thing called gross margin. Exactly. Yeah. And then if you do that efficiently, but it is a beautiful way. Like I love Blue Ocean Strategy. It's a wonderful book, but this is a more updated view. And I love the model in the book. It's so on a strategy piece, it's been served in very well for a bunch of work.
Simpler Strategy. Who's the author, Kev?
Felix Obsterwalder-Guy. I'm probably going to not pronounce it properly. Yep.
Felix.
I know I said it wrong. Sorry, Felix, I said your name wrong, but.
No, that's awesome. How can people learn more about you and your business?
Well, you can read one of the books, but just go to Lawrence and Co, ANDCO.com. Search for Kevin Lawrence, and you can read about kind of what we do, all kinds of client case studies. Like Brad, we have a lot of case studies and articles and resources. We want to share what we have as wide as we can, and then some people choose to hire us.
What haven't we discussed that you wanted to cover off today?
I think the biggest risk of growth. And I think, and this ties into your oxygen mask first a little bit, but like if you're not careful, growth can own you and it can really take over your life. It's awesome. It's one of the most exciting things. And it's probably a little bit for some people like a drug or an addiction in some way. They can really, really pull you. And it's because it's so darn exciting. Like it's a thrill ride. It's like being on a roller coaster. I love it. And you got to choose like your own journey on this. And if you're the one making the growth choices, to make sure you grow at a pace that's healthy and sustainable for you and your organization, and it doesn't overheat the whole thing. And that's a hard thing to define or decide. But I think it's awesome, but it can be really, really addictive. And then sometimes people can overdo it and kind of melt down the system because it's when you're winning, there's nothing like it. Like it's awesome. Yeah. And so that what I say is, yeah, just it's a high stakes, high reward game, but sometimes I see people get lost in it and afterwards like, yeah, we just pushed it too hard.
Lovely, lovely. Well, congratulations again on the book, The Four Forces of Growth, available wherever good books are sold. And it has been once again a pleasure, Kev, to connect with you, to get some insights, I guess, around your thinking on this book, and yeah, just to catch up.
It's always awesome to catch up. I love when we get to have these discussions together. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.